everyone, welcome to my channel. So in today's video, I wanted to share with all of you my thoughts about Pat McGrath the brand and the new Sunlit Seduction release. So originally I wasn't going to film this video because I have ordered the palette. It should be coming later this week, and so I will definitely film one and maybe two videos with looks and comparison swatches with that palette. So I was just going to share all of my thoughts in that one video. But because my order has been delayed compared to some other folks's, and I have been seeing a lot of reviews coming out, I wanted to come on here and just share with you guys my thoughts about a lot of the discussion and drama that's been happening around this release from Pat McGrath, because I do have a lot of thoughts about this, and I figure if I put this all in one big video with the palette, it's going to be just way too much. So in today's video, I'm going to do a full face of Pat McGrath, and I'm going to be going in with my Huetopian Dream palette and my Ritualistic Rose palette, because I feel like these are the two palettes that are most similar to the Sunlit Seduction palette. So this is also, I guess, kind of doubling as a duping that palette video. But this is going to basically be like a chatty get ready with me, where I'm going to put all this makeup on my face and talk through this release. And so hopefully this is interesting for all of you who, like me, are big Pat McGrath fans, have been watching this release, have been watching all the discourse about it. And so I just wanted to add my thoughts to the mix as well. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm not going to talk a ton about the products because I do have so many videos on my channel with these products, and I will have them linked in the description box in case you guys are curious. But of course, if you have questions, do not hesitate to ask in the comment section. So basically what really motivated me to film this video is I've been honestly quite frustrated with a lot of the discourse I've been seeing around this Sunlit Seduction release. So basically, like a lot of folks, I was quite unhappy when I saw the palette released. So this is not a new feeling for me. I was honestly really devastated with Huetopian Dream, for example, because she had been teasing sort of a pastel, colorful anime palette, and we basically got Divine Rose 3. But this palette, Sunlit Seduction, definitely felt like an even further slap in the face, in that there's really nothing unique or special about this color story. And she had been teasing sunset vibes, so I was already prepared that this wasn't going to be like a beautiful green, blue, colorful palette like a lot of people have been asking for. But at least I anticipated something that would be maybe a bit more orangey or purpley, just a little bit different than what we have been seeing from the brand. And so it was definitely quite disappointing when it was so similar to so many of her recent releases. And so I think that sentiment is quite common among the Pat McGrath fan community. But for me, what has been sort of distressing in the videos that I've been watching is that I feel like there's been this trend of a lot of influencers sort of gaslighting themselves and also other Pat McGrath fans by sort of justifying, or at least trying to justify, the decision for this palette. And so I've been hearing a lot of YouTubers talk about how, well, you know, this is just like how things have to be because all of us keep buying these pink palettes, so of course she's gonna keep making them. Or like, this is just how capitalism works, she has to cater to her investors. Or now she has like quotas or things like that. I've been hearing all sorts of justifications for why. And this has been frustrating to me on a few fronts. So first off, there's an element of kind of like blaming the victim that I feel like is happening here, where it's like, oh yeah, because you guys like buy these palettes, obviously it's kind of your fault. Like, you might say that you don't want a pink palette, but then if you buy it anyway, then of course she's gonna keep making it. And I get that in theory, but also like there is the concept of, when you're putting out products, avoiding cannibalization of your other sales. And so not every single brand takes the approach that they're going to just release the same color story year after year. In fact, I think we have a really nice counterpoint in the form of Natasha Denona. So she, like Pat McGrath, is a brand that's especially well known for her eyeshadows, and she is a major brand as well. She is not an indie brand. She's in pretty much every single Sephora. Yes, maybe Pat McGrath is a bigger brand than her, but Natasha Denona does not hesitate to come out with interesting color stories. In fact, her latest release, the Yucca palette, I think is exactly the sort of thing we've been asking from Pat McGrath. So something with greens, maybe tinges of blue, something that has more of an earthy color story to it. People have also been asking for the longest time for like a Pat McGrath neutral palette. So we can look at examples like the Natasha Denona Bronze palette or the Natasha Denona Glam palette. So these are all palettes that look very, very different to each other and have all been huge commercial successes for Natasha Denona. So I think the idea that the only way that Pat McGrath can have commercially successful palettes is to churn out the exact same predominantly pink with a bit of gold and bronze color stories is just doesn't actually make sense with the reality of the situation. Like clearly this is a more proactive choice, and it's not like, oh, this is just how capitalism works, and if you put out a green palette, no one's gonna buy it. And in fact, if you are putting out the exact same color story year after year, it makes it less likely that people are going to buy your previous palettes as well. So yes, for folks who already bought all of the Divine Roses, if they decide to buy this one as well, it's not like they can take it back that they bought the Divine Roses previously. But of course, for people who are new to Pat McGrath, given that Pat McGrath is growing, expanding to new audiences, having a lot of palettes that look very similar decreases the chances that someone's going to buy a bunch of palettes. So it's not really kind of a given that this is necessarily the best business decision ever. So I just wanted to dispel some of that myth as well. Of course, none of us have access to Pat McGrath's earning data, so this is all speculation from people. And so I want us at least to acknowledge that it's not like this is just inevitable and Pat McGrath is just clearly doing what is best for market forces and she has no choice in the matter. The reality is that this might or might not be a good business decision in the long run. And I think this is especially true when you also consider the fact that the market in makeup is very competitive, and Pat McGrath has occupied sort of a unique space in the luxury makeup arena where she is very much known for her avant-garde makeup, and basically her niche is providing access to more avant-garde makeup for an amateur retail audience. And so that is a fairly unique niche that she occupies. That's something that Charlotte Tilbury, Patrick Ta, Gucci, Dior, all of these other brands that you might think about as possibly competing with her, none of them have this same sort of vibe. Basically, for her to kind of give up on that and provide palettes that are all kind of in the same very easygoing, rosy, everyday color story is also potentially meaning that she is giving up on that sort of market that she currently has a lot of dominance in, and instead is joining a market that is very saturated right now. I mean, I think there's a reason that for most of these other brands, they actually don't release that many eyeshadow palettes, especially nowadays, because there's only so many rosy everyday palettes that people want. And so once you have one or two of those, it's not like you're necessarily going to continue to buy one every single year from the brand. So overall, I mean, maybe someone at Pat McGrath Labs has crunched the numbers and is really astute and is making the best business decisions by doing this, but it's also not a foregone conclusion. And I think there's no reason to assume that this is all part of some sort of business mastermind situation. I mean, we also know that it's not like everything always runs super smoothly at Pat McGrath Labs from a business perspective. For those of you who have been buying palettes from her website for a long time, it is very notorious in terms of having very poor shipping, very poor communication about shipping. So again, I think it's like very strange that we spend so much time complaining about the website and about various aspects of the brand, and then we assume that maybe the things that are most problematic in terms of color stories and releasing the same palettes over and over again are part of this really deep mastermind operation where they are super in touch with their consumers and what they want. So I just want to put that all out there as food for thought that, you know, it's not necessarily a given that it's ideal for Pat McGrath from a business perspective to do all of this. But let's just take for a moment as that premise that maybe this is the best way for her to make money, and maybe, you know, there are just all these investors giving her a lot of pressure and this is what they want her to do because it's at least best for short-term profitability. If that's the case, you know, there's another way to describe this scenario, which is basically that Pat McGrath has sold out. So I've been shocked at how many people use this kind of explanation, but frame it in like a Pat McGrath apologist way, as in somehow this justifies her actions and means we can't judge her or shouldn't judge her, when to me, this is just like textbook selling out. I mean, if it's true that these are just the color stories that she needs to come out with in order to make some sort of investor quotas, these are not her artistic vision, but it's just what she needs to do for the business in order to make as much money as possible in the short term, then there's really no other way to describe the scenario. And I wouldn't say, you know, like selling out is necessarily like categorically a bad thing or anything. I mean, tons of people sell out, it's fine, you know, different people have different priorities in terms of their artistic values versus commercial values. That's totally fine, but let's just call things as they are and not beat around the bush and be like, oh yeah, well, you know, she has to do this because of her investors, and that's totally legit. I mean, just admit that you're saying that she's selling out. So that's something that has been really frustrating to me, because I think if we admit that, it also will be less like we're blaming the Pat McGrath fans for this. Because again, like, I really don't like it when people say things like, yeah, it's like our fault for buying this stuff, that's why she does it. If the point you're actually trying to make is that Pat McGrath has just sold out and doesn't really care about her fans, then that's a fine point to make. But just make that clear. Don't somehow twist this to be about the fans bringing all of this upon themselves. So that's the bulk of my rant. Basically, I wanted to put that all out there because I do just dislike very strongly the direction a lot of this discourse is going into, especially when then people feel like they have to be like, oh, sorry, I picked up Sunlit Seduction, I'm part of the problem, all this stuff. I mean, these are ultimately conscious business decisions that Pat McGrath is making. They're not releasing these palettes without consulting her at all. At least I assume that's not what is happening. And so as much as we all love Pat McGrath and want to defend her, I think it is also time to just acknowledge that what we are really saying between the lines is that we think that she has sold out, and we need to come to a point of acceptance about that. Either in terms of deciding that we're going to support other brands as well, if this is something that's really problematic to you, or just accepting that she has sold out and the brand that we fell in love with is no longer the brand that she is running. And my personal hope is if we can all be a little bit more honest about this as well, then we can also evaluate her products a little bit more honestly. So for me, for example, I still purchased Sunlit Seduction because frankly, I still do enjoy her formulas, even though she has been cutting back in terms of the creativity, and also she has gotten rid of her baked Blitz Astral shades. Now they're just the ones pressed in the pan, like indie shadows. So that's all been quite disappointing to me, but I still purchased her palette because it was 30% off. I have this channel and a lot of you guys are interested in this content, and I myself am very curious as well about this new palette. So that's why I picked it up. Because frankly, I think with Pat McGrath's releases becoming increasingly disappointing. She's actually creating a lot of room for potential competitors as well. There is now this significant gap that's opening up for folks who do want more interesting makeup and eyeshadow palettes, but want a little bit more curation than what your typical indie brand offers. Don't get me wrong, I love indie brands, but something I always loved about Pat McGrath palettes is the luxuriousness of the packaging, plus the fact that her color creations were really exceptional. But for me, honestly, I think Natasha Denona is starting to close that gap a lot, especially with her latest release, the Yucca palette. These flaky foily shades that she has, her new sparkling metallic formula that you get 4 of in this palette, are as sparkly as a lot of my Pat McGrath shades. Now, they don't have the same wham bam effect that you get with some of Pat McGrath's Astral shades, but since she is starting to get rid of those anyway, I feel like Natasha Denona is actually catching up a lot with her. So whether that's good or bad for Pat McGrath, we'll have to wait and see. But personally, I really hope that she reconsiders the approach that she's had recently. I don't know if she's just uninspired or what the deal is at the company, but I don't think it's as simple as just saying that pink sells or that this is what happens as a result of capitalism. So I went off camera to finish the look because I can't really do eyeliner while talking. Here is the complete, very quick, full face of Pat McGrath with my Huetopian Dream and Ritualistic Rose semi-dupe of the Sunlit Seduction palette. Up till this point in the video, I've mostly been talking kind of more generally about Pat McGrath and the trajectory that her brand has taken recently. So now I did want to just talk more specifically about this particular launch. So in addition to the fact that this launch was kind of borderline offensive in terms of how much it was a refutation of everything Pat McGrath fans have been asking for. I mean, if you look at the comments on her Instagram, anytime she has like an inspiration thing coming out, people are always like, I hope it's not going to be a new pink palette. I hope it's not going to be super pink. So it's very clear that the brand knows that folks don't want that, and yet here we are. Here's kind of the pinkest of all palettes, but not in a very interesting way. Like, it would be one thing if this was like a Barbie pink palette with a lot of pink and purple and something a little bit different. This was instead just like literally, if you took the average of her past several releases, you would get basically this palette. And so in addition to the fact that the palette itself was just clearly not what people were asking for, the way they handled this launch too was also very disappointing, in that when folks were criticizing the launch when it came out, talking about how it was too pink, talking about how it was disappointing, they started removing comments and even blocking people. So I think that's just really unacceptable and just kind of shows the extent to which the brand is not actually caring so much about what people think, especially people who actually are longtime fans and supporters of the brand. And so that to me honestly has been part of what's been so disappointing about all of this, and so disappointing also whenever I feel like folks are trying to justify Pat McGrath's choices or decisions by, you know, saying it's what the people want or things like that. I don't really know if this is what the people want. I don't really know if that's what's going on. And so to summarize, the TLDR version of this rant basically is that I think for all of us in this community of makeup fans who love Pat McGrath, who were really inspired by Pat McGrath to go out of the box with makeup, to embrace makeup artistry, to feel like we could do something really creative and innovative with our makeup looks, we're all kind of processing Pat McGrath's shift from being a brand that is this sort of gateway makeup artistry, innovative brand that plays around with colors and textures, to a brand that is basically just like any other makeup brand that just provides what is most basic and most common. We're all processing this shift in her brand kind of differently and in our own way. But in this grieving process that we're all going through, I hope that we can not beat around the bush so much in terms of what's happening. And what's happening is that the brand has sold out and we all are mourning that. But I don't think that's a good reason for us to either A, try to justify the brand's actions, B, try to blame ourselves or blame other consumers for causing the brand to make this shift, because that's really not a foregone conclusion, and C, pretend that all of this was just the inevitable outcome of the brand becoming more successful and just what happens in capitalism or in society, as if individual people didn't make clear decisions that led to this point. Not every single brand, as it goes bigger, goes in the direction of becoming more boring and more repetitive and disappointing, and losing a lot of your core original demographic isn't always the best long-term business decision, even if you are trying to cater to new demographics. So that's my personal take on the current drama about Pat McGrath and about this Sunlit Seduction release. As I mentioned, I did buy the palette when it was on 30% off. It is coming to me later this week. I will film videos with it. I wouldn't be surprised if I enjoy it on some level, because it does have shades that I like, and given the size of my makeup collection compared to the average consumer, I worry a little bit less about repetitive shades. But I think regardless of whether I like or dislike that palette, it doesn't really change my thoughts about this broader discourse or about the broader direction of Pat McGrath as a brand in terms of what she's offering and what I can expect from her brand. So that's why I want to share this with you guys today. But thanks so much for watching till the end of this video. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!